Do you ever feel like you're caught between trusting God and doubting Him at the same time? Maybe you're praying for something important, a job, a relationship, healing, and you believe God can handle it, but then there's this voice in the back of your mind. What if He doesn't? It's so frustrating to live in that tension, belief and doubt sitting side by side. If that's you, you're not alone. It's human, and honestly, the Bible is full of people who felt the same way. Take Abram, for example. His story in Genesis 15 hits this dynamic perfectly. At this point, Abram has been following God for years. He left his home, his family, and everything familiar because God has promised him two things, okay? One, that he would have descendants as numerous as the stars, and two, his descendants would have land to call home. But years have passed, and there's still no children and no land. And in Genesis 15:1, God says to Abram, "Do not be afraid. I am your shield, your very great reward." It's this amazing reassurance. God is telling Abram, "I'm with you, I've got you." But Abram doesn't hide how he's feeling. He says, "Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless?" Translation, I hear you, but God, I don't see it. How is this going to work? Then God reassures him again, saying, "Your very own son will be your heir." Then he takes Abram outside, points to the sky, and says, "Look at the stars. So shall your offspring be." And here's where it gets real. In verse 6, it says, "Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness." You see, Abram trusts God, but the story doesn't stop there. In verse 7, God brings up the second promise, the land. "I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to take possession of it." And Abram's faith wavers again. He asks in verse 8, "Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it?" You see, here we go. Faith and doubt. This is where the story gets real. Abram had faith when it came to one promise, but he doubted the other. He believed here, but questioned there. Doesn't that sound familiar? We can trust God in one part of our lives, but feel shaky in another. You might trust Him with your salvation, but question whether He'll provide financially. Or you might trust Him with your career, but doubt whether He can heal a relationship. Faith and doubt often coexist. And what's so powerful about this story is how God responds to Abram. Years ago, my wife and I were in a season that tested our faith in familiar ways. At the time, I was a youth pastor at a small church, and we didn't make much money. But we trusted God to provide, and somehow, we always had enough. Even when things were tight, we knew God would come through. But then we hit a different kind of challenge. When we decided to start to try and have a family, we faced a string of miscarriages, and it was devastating. I remember sitting with the tension of believing God was good, but struggling to see it in this part of our lives. And I trusted Him with our finances, but this felt different. This felt personal. I remember praying and asking, how can I know? How can I know that you're still working, that this is going to be okay? Fast forward to today, and we have 4 amazing kids. But here's the thing. Looking back, what stands out isn't just that God gave us children, it's how He carried us through the pain, even when the outcome was uncertain. And what I've learned is this. God's faithfulness isn't tied to results, it's tied to who He is. That's what we see in Genesis 15. When Abram asks, "How can I know?" God doesn't get frustrated. He doesn't say, "Really, Abram, after everything I've said?" Instead, God meets Abram in his doubt. God makes a covenant, a binding promise, and Abram prepares sacrifices, and God appears as a smoking fire pot and a blazing torch passing between these pieces. And here's what's powerful. Only God walks through. Abram doesn't. This shows that the promise doesn't depend on Abram's ability to stay faithful. It depends entirely on God's faithfulness. And that's the heart of this story. God is faithful, even when we have doubt. This moment with Abram points us directly to Jesus. In the New Testament, we see Jesus doing the same thing, meeting people in their faith and their doubts. One story that stands out is in Mark 9. A father brings his son to Jesus. The boy is possessed by an evil spirit, and the father has already tried everything. He says to Jesus, "If you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." And Jesus responds, "If you can, everything is possible for one who believes." The father's reply is honest. "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." And Jesus doesn't reject him. He doesn't say, "Come back when your faith is stronger." Instead, he heals the boy. This is amazing. This is what God does. He doesn't wait for us to have perfect faith. He meets us where we are. So let me ask you this. Where are you struggling to trust God right now? Maybe it's a relationship, a financial decision, or something deeply personal. Here's what you need to know, okay? God's faithfulness doesn't depend on your perfect faith. He's not asking you to figure it all out. He's asking you to trust him one step at a time.